Hi everyone, the New York Times just published a hit piece on the RSS, and it's another opportunity for me to show how activists work through journalistic and academic networks to vilify organizations with which they disagree. So this is an article about the RSS, a far-right network. And what does it do? It runs youth hostels, blood banks, and yoga centers. So not so nefarious. The article is written by Felix Powell, who's a lecturer at the University of Western Australia, perfectly reputable university, has a PhD from ANU. He seems like a reasonably accomplished up-and-coming scholar. Now, he went to visit Nagpur and learned about the RSS. He gives a correct depiction of how it was originally founded and organized, so okay. He says that the early RSS believed India's Muslim minority posed a dire threat to the Hindu majority. That is questionable, but it's within the realm of what a legitimate researcher could conclude. But then we get to the problems. So first of all, look at this. The RSS is shrouded in secrecy. That's simply not true. I mean, if you just go to any RSS function, you can get paraphernalia, literally pamphlets in English bragging about all the activities the RSS is engaged in. So it's not really very secret. Wikipedia has all the information you need about it. Condemned for complicity in mass violence. Now, note the careful choice of word there. He doesn't say that the RSS is complicit in mass violence. That would require evidence that doesn't exist. He says that it has been condemned for complicity in mass violence, which is absolutely true. Now, what kind of complicity? We have a link here. Now, it sounds like mass violence against Indian religious minorities. After all, he's just said RSS is against the Muslim minority. He himself is a scholar of Islam. So what kind of complicity? Hindu-Christian violence. What's more, what kind of Hindu-Christian violence? Well, Hindu-Christian violence, it started when a group of Christians attacked the vehicle of an RSS functionary. And then there was retaliation back and forth. I don't know the truth of all of these allegations, but it's a strange link to give to assert mass violence on the part of the RSS. Now, is the RSS criticized for trying to rewrite Indian history? Certainly it is, by mainstream historians who often have themselves misrepresented Indian history. Does the RSS vilify medieval Muslim rule? Absolutely. Medieval Muslim rule in India was extremely harsh and very destructive. Nothing really wrong with vilifying it. It's noted for its close relationship with the BJP. Well, no surprise there. Now, he's been spending the last 6 years mapping out the connections between the RSS and the rest of other organizations around the world. Research published in the Caravan. Okay, great. I'm glad to see it was published in Caravan. Let's take a look at it. Here's the RSS story in Caravan. It mostly gives, if we just click through to the full story, it mostly gives the same information as the New York Times article, just in greater detail. It tells about lots of service organizations the RSS is involved in. Great, no problem there. And if I scroll to the end, it says that I can download the data behind the article. Requests for access can be submitted to Sciences Po Siri here. Now, Sciences Po, raised a red flag for me, because who's at Sciences Po? Our favorite Indologist, Christophe Jaffrelot. And in fact, when you click through, you find that the investigation is one between Felix Powell and Christophe Jaffrelot. So there you go. No surprise to that connection. I'm supposed to be able to access the data. I'd love to do that. Let's access the data. Oh, file restricted. Users may not request access to files. Well, I sent them an email requesting access anyway. Maybe that was just an error. We'll see if they give that to me. Okay, now back to the article. The author uncovers all sorts of activities that the RSS is involved in. Agricultural research, an old age home, cow refuge, a school, a temple, an herbal medicine research center. As he himself admits, it is certainly not the vision of the far right that most people have. In fact, there's nothing wrong with any of that. Now, he more closely studied the RSS and its affiliates, 25 organizations linked to the Sangh, and you could bet if he had identified among those 25 organizations that were involved in some kind of violence extremism, we would have heard about it. I mean, it would be in this article. Instead, what he's able to identify are blood banks, publishing houses, yoga schools, universities, sewing training centers, a cigarillo manufacturing union. They're helping workers. A cricket tournament being sponsored. A pilgrimage tour to Angkor Wat. Well, again, what's wrong with any of that? Now, if he had found evidence that the RSS was associated with militant organizations, I mean, imagine if someone were to trace out the Muslim Brotherhood's connections and connections of people, not just direct connections, but connections of people associated with Muslim Brotherhood, went to 40 countries, 2,400 organizations. Imagine all of the violence you could uncover for an organization like the Muslim Brotherhood. The fact that he hasn't uncovered anything worse than, a vague connection to cigarettes is really almost shocking. Now, he does say that this helps the RSS change society, and in fact, that's what the RSS claims to do. That is, it's attempting to change society. But doesn't everybody have the right to try to change society? What makes that problematic? He says that the RSS is connected to 400 hostels that shelter and educate marginalized youth. Shouldn't that be applauded? I mean, especially from Adivasi indigenous communities. Again, if an Australian not-for-profit was running 400 hostels for indigenous youth here in urban Australia to help them get an education, that would be the most magnificent activity they could undertake. And if those organizations were themselves Christian, well, nothing really wrong with that. People are motivated by their religion. In fact, he says explicitly that these hostels are not overt in their espousal of what he calls Hindu supremacy. Nonetheless, some students who attend these hostels or stay in these hostels do get involved with the RSS. And that's, of course, why organizations like Christian organizations, Muslim service organizations, Hindu service organizations are involved in civil society, not only to do good in the world, but also to attract members and to spread their own ideas. Now, he says this happens in other countries as well, fine. But then he says, and here's the clincher, across the globe, far-right organizing threatens democratic norms. Now, nowhere in this article has a single example being given of the RSS threatening democratic norms. He says that, this is not a fight between progressive civil society and, shapeless far-right force that spreads an invisible pathogen. Again, implying that the RSS is an invisible pathogen when the RSS is highly public about its activities. It promotes its activities. It's bragging about its activities. All you have to do is get an RSS pamphlet, and it'll tell you how many shelters and hostels it runs for Adivasi youth. This is not some secret agenda. This is a very public agenda. Okay. Now, he says that, in fact, it is precisely through visible, legal organizing that far-right civil society is mobilizing anti-democratic forces. But again, there's nothing in this article that says that it is that shows any sense of anti-democratic activism. Okay, so we have all this from a scholar activist. How do I know that he's a scholar activist? Well, I can go to the Avert website. Now, Avert is a highly reputable Australian organization that is a research network addressing violent extremism and radicalization to terrorism. Why is the RSS the focus of an organization that is addressing violent extremism and radicalization to terrorism? There are very few allegations of RSS violence and no allegations I'm aware of whatsoever of RSS terrorism. Yet here he is, and here's the operative sentence. Felix is interested in academic activist partnerships that work on challenging far-right mobilizations. Now, that is the clincher. Being an active academic activist instead of being an academic. People often ask why I get involved in these sorts of debates, why I'm interested, why I make YouTube videos about this. And the simple answer is that I do it because I am an academic. I'm not an activist. I just want to get the truth out. In fact, I would love to access the truth about these 2,400 organizations that are connected to the Sangh. I'd love to get that data and analyze it. I certainly wouldn't put it behind a "you must be one of us and get permission in order to use the data." I'd be publicizing the data. It'd be great to have that data accessible. What I get tired of is all the lies. I just get tired of all the lying, and I want to do something to expose it. Now, this article is in the New York Times. That New York Times article now will be picked up by Wikipedia. It'll be picked up by other sources, Variety's Democracy Institute, because if something's in the New York Times, that makes it authoritative. And I can't tell you how difficult it is to get an article in the New York Times. It's virtually impossible. I mean, the only way to get a long guest essay in the New York Times is to have some inside connection to the Times. Now, whether that was Christophe Jaffrelot, who I believe he's certainly been cited in the Times. I think he's authored for the Times, or somebody else who gave this perfectly reputable, but let's face it, very junior scholar, a lecturer at the University of Western Australia, Google H-index of 4, very remote from New York. I mean, as an associate professor who's published in foreign affairs and foreign policy and the national interest, I can't get in the New York Times. I mean, it's difficult for me to get in the Australian or the Sydney Morning Herald because there's so much demand to get into these papers. For a junior unknown scholar from Western Australia, one of the most remote places in the world, to get a piece in the New York Times is truly exceptional. And it does mean that somebody wanted to see this piece published. He didn't just submit this to the Times and hope for the best. He got a break to get in the Times. Now, people get breaks. You know, it's kind of petulant of me not to want other people to get breaks, but I think you as viewers should understand that you don't just submit an article to the New York Times, you are cultivated for an article in the New York Times. All right, that's how it all works. I'll let you know if I get that Siri data, if they approve my request for the data. That'll be really interesting to find out. In the meantime, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.